Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Matthew Hine, and today I'll be giving a presentation on the article Stop Making Plans, Start Making Decisions, written by Michael Mankins and Richard Steele. It was part of the week 6 reading package. The reason I chose this article really revolved around my ability to be able to relate to the topic, really after witnessing a lot of the inefficiencies within my own workplace with respect to how we go about making critical and strategic decisions. So what will I be talking about today? I'll start off by looking at the objective and the argument of the article. So really, what was it trying to achieve? Followed by the methodology. So how did it go about achieving it, looking at the tools it used and developing the argument. I'll then move on to sources and credibility, so delving into where the information came from, how it originated, and really was it valid information to be using? Were the sources really valid? Then looking at literature review, so how does the article compare against the academic literature, I guess is important. So is the article supported by it or not? Then moving on to practical applications. Are there learnings and recommendations within the article that management can easily take away and implement in their own work environment? And finally, we'll finish with conclusions, questions, and a brief overview, I guess, of what was discussed throughout the presentation. So, the objective and the argument. In terms of the objective, it really focused around demonstrating strategic planning, not so much about decision making anymore within the workforce, but more about documentation of decisions which have already been made. And as such, current day strategic planning is really inefficient within the workplace. So the argument was twofold, I guess. The first being, as you can see, that strategic planning is traditionally considered to be an annual process undertaken as part of the budget. So it's an annual thing and therefore restrictive in its application. Mankins and Steele refer to this as the calendar effect. The second prong was it suggests it's more focused on individual business units rather than overall strategy as a whole, referred to as the business unit effect. And then the article finishes by concluding and recommending that removing strategic decision making from the annual planning process and operating it as a separate function really is the optimal solution in Mankins and Steele's opinion. So the methodology, how did they go about making their argument? I guess there was a number of tools they used. The first for case studies, which is Eisenhart suggested in a work in 2000, really important in developing context and I guess develops and presents the relationships between constructs and the underlying arguments in a digestible manner. And look, Steele and Mankins use case studies to great effect. The facts as well. So what are facts? They're purported to be absolute truths and non-debatable. However, implying something's truthful isn't necessarily factful, and it's important to identify, I guess, throughout the article, there is a lot of cited data which is purported to be factual. However, how factual that is, we'll look at a bit later. An example there, or just a quote, 67% of executives say planning is done unit by unit. So I guess care must be taken when assessing the validity of these statements. They also use quite a large number of observations that business cases have seen. So XCOM, Boeing, Microsoft, Cadbury and Schweppes, I guess being a few of them. And there, once again, observations are another effective tool used in illustrating an argument. And then experiences as well. So I guess the main distinguishing feature between observations and experiences, observations really is something we've heard, and experiences is a first-hand encounter. So you can see an example there of the article where they've said we've observed best performing companies. And then what else they use? Storytelling, presentation, format, and structure. So in terms of the language they use, it's really palatable for the article. Doesn't get bogged down in too much jargon, and it's easy to digest. So, sources and credibility. Sorry, just moving the screen a little bit. I guess reviewing the credibility of some of the evidence presented, there were some points of interest. So mainly in the survey, which they refer to quite a lot, the American Associates survey, we couldn't locate any records of that from 2005. So while it's not the be-all and end-all, it would have been really good, I guess, to locate a copy of the survey to be able to validate the data they were using. Similarly, the company search, they referred to XCOM quite a lot throughout the article. It was one of their key reference points, and there were no records that I could locate of a US listed company called XCOM. So there was an Australian company called XCOM Education, and they filed for voluntary administration shortly after the article was published. And of course, it was used in the article in glowing terms. I'd like to hope that's not the company they were referring to. The experience and references, they were quite generalised and non-specific, so they didn't name any names of companies with which they had experienced, I guess, the inefficiencies within the workplace of strategic planning. And also lack of citation referencing throughout the article. So I guess it does bring into question the credibility a little bit when you can't easily identify the sources, but then it's probably worth noting as well, it's quite common with respect to articles written in these highly ranked journals. So I guess the authors are world-renowned experts, and to their credit, further research of the authors really validated their credibility. Next is the lit review. So I guess in general, when undertaking the lit review, the article was really well supported. So volatility in the business environment makes systematic strategic planning difficult. We know that. Grant's work on that in 2003 looked at strategic planning in a turbulent environment, really in the context of the oil majors. That article supported Steele and Mankin's article. There were plenty of empirical case studies, budgeting in the Great Depression in US cities by Jimmers in 2014, perspective on strategy, Honda success, Roy and Singh looked at that, and the 2015 Indian steel sectors by Pascal. So there was quite a lot of empirical studies which backed up what this article was saying, and similar investigations of strategic decision making. There was a lot of work done on that by Tapia, Kemay, Pernod, and Bergelman, which are all in the references, but really do go a long way in validating what the argument of the article was. In terms of context, it's probably important now just to recognise the majority of the work within the academic community was undertaken over a period of time from the realisation that management needed to be continually focused on strategy as opposed to being a once-a-year process. So the traditional view was undertaken at the budget period, and exposure from the academic community to real-life organisations has really swayed their way of thinking, and now it's critical that it's a continual focus. And that was evident throughout the literature. I guess in terms of literature contradictions, or where the article wasn't fully supported or counter-arguments were made, but really revolved around the fact that there's other uses and functionality for strategic plans, not necessarily the ones Steele and Mankins were referring to. So for example, they can promote and provide consensus, commitment and transparency through the business, which Chanel and Tanner in 2005, Grant in 2013 and Langley in 1988 through his work Communication Strategy and the Art of Persuasion really confirmed and validated. And similarly, it can really provide stakeholder engagement. Again, Langley in 1988 looked at this in his paper, The Roles of Formal Strategic Planning. So shareholders, governments, other parties with a self-interest, strategic planning and communicating those out can really get buy-in and build some comfort and trust in the company. In terms of practical application, Well, the upside was they did provide a framework, which you can see on the right. So the framework itself, it depicts the executive timeline. So you can see there throughout each quarter, there'll be some prep work, 1 or 2 issues identified. A task force will then be commissioned to go away, do the due diligence on those issues, report back to the executive, and then make a decision. So I guess that framework there, when you break it down, it's timely. The due diligence and research is done, but it's malleable and dynamic as well. So you're not waiting the full year before you make significant key business decisions. And in terms of downside of the framework, well, in terms of, I guess, resourcing, so outside of traditional business structure, you may have to commission a whole new team to go away and independently research and work on doing the due diligence for these issues. And it's quite simplistic as well in terms of the time frame. So some issues might kick out longer than, what do they have there, 3 weeks really. They've got 3 weeks to look at an issue. Some may be way more complicated and require far more input and research. Yeah, so the timeline there is simplistic, I guess, in a practical sense. So in terms of conclusions, I guess I'd argue it's well supported by existing academic work, which we identified in the lit review, and focuses really around the inefficiencies of strategic planning. So how there's a real focus on business to do it better and take it outside of the annual budgeting process. It identifies a requirement for a more robust process, which it outlines through the continuous decision-orientated framework, which you just went through. And while some of the information used to make the arguments couldn't be sourced, the surveys, and couldn't find the company details, when most of the information was cross-checked, certainly against literature and when doing background checks on the authors, it was found to be credible. So yeah, look, really good article. Apologies. I guess in closing, I thank you for your time, and yeah,